She decided to wage a one-woman war against a beautiful historic tree, and in the process, she didn't just lose a fight, she managed to get herself, and her entire neighborhood, slapped with a legal nightmare worth over $500,000. This is a journey of epic pettiness, spectacular self-destruction, and the sweet, sweet taste of justice. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. And if you need more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single story. Liam was not a complicated guy. He was a landscape architect, a man who appreciated order, beauty, and quiet. After years of living in noisy apartments, his dream was simple. A house with a bit of land, a place where he could cultivate his own little slice of peace. When he found the house on Maple Lane, he knew he was home. It was a charming older house, but the real selling point wasn't the house itself. It was the backyard, and in the center of that backyard stood the most magnificent oak tree he had ever seen. This wasn't just some tree. This was a landmark, a living piece of history. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, a testament to the centuries it had witnessed. Its branches, some as thick as a man's body, reached out like protective arms, creating a vast, cool canopy. An arborist report that came with the house estimated it was well over 200 years old, predating every other house, every street, even the town's official charter. It was, according to a certificate from the city's historical society, a designated heritage tree. This wasn't just a title, it was a legal shield. The ordinance was clear. You couldn't so much as sneeze on this tree without city approval and a team of certified experts. It was, for all intents and purposes, untouchable. And for Liam, it was the soul of his property. He paid a premium for that house, for that tree, and for the tranquility it represented. For 5 wonderful years, life was exactly as he'd hoped. The neighborhood was a quiet enclave of friendly, like-minded people. The HOA was mostly a formality, a passive entity that made sure the community pool was clean and sent out a cheerful holiday newsletter. It was perfect. And then, of course, the moving trucks arrived 2 doors down. A storm was coming, and its name was Karen. You know the type. You can feel it from a mile away. Karen moved in with an aura of bristling, aggressive energy that seemed to curdle the very air around her. She was one of those people who mistakes confrontation for communication and considers her personal preferences to be universal laws. From day one, she made it her mission to improve the neighborhood, which was her code for remake it in my own joyless image. Before her moving boxes were even fully unpacked, she had announced her candidacy for the HOA board presidency. Since the position was unpaid, thankless, and largely ceremonial, no one else ever wanted it. So, Karen won by default, a victory she treated with the solemnity of a presidential inauguration. And with that, her reign of terror began. The first sign was the mailboxes. The old, varied mailboxes were suddenly deemed chaotically non-uniform. A memo was issued. All mailboxes must be replaced with a specific, HOA-approved model in a shade of beige so bland it could make you clinically depressed just by looking at it. Then came the war on holiday decorations. A new rule was enacted, stating all festive decor must be removed by January 20, 11:59 p.m. One poor family on the next street over, whose father was a doctor working long holiday shifts, had their inflatable snowman taken down on January 3rd and received a $100 fine for their transgression. The neighborhood, once relaxed and friendly, was suddenly awash in a sea of petty violation notices. A garden hose coiled clockwise instead of counterclockwise. A child's tricycle left on a driveway for more than an hour. A welcome mat deemed to have excessive personality. It was absurd. A slow-motion descent into suburban tyranny, all orchestrated by one woman with a clipboard and a bottomless well of righteous indignation. Liam, like most of his neighbors, grumbled quietly but complied. It was easier to just buy the beige mailbox than to start a fight. He just wanted to be left alone. But a tyrant is never satisfied with small victories. A true Karen needs a grander stage, a bigger enemy to vanquish. And from her back porch, Karen had a direct line of sight to the one thing in the neighborhood that dared to be grand, unique, and utterly outside of her control. Liam's magnificent, 200-year-old oak tree. It started subtly, a few passive-aggressive comments when they crossed paths while getting the mail. "That's quite a tree you've got there, Liam," she'd say. her voice dripping with a sickly sweet poison. "It certainly casts a lot of shadows." Liam, ever the diplomat, would just smile and agree. "It's a beauty, isn't it? Been here forever." He thought if he was just pleasant enough, she'd move on to some other perceived infraction, like a neighbor's unapproved brand of lawn fertilizer. But Karen wasn't just making small talk. She was probing, testing the waters. The tree offended her. It was too big, too old, too messy for her sterile vision of the perfect suburban street. It dropped leaves in her pristine, chemically treated yard. Its sheer, unalterable presence was a daily affront to her authority. It was a monument to a time before her, and she could not abide it. The Cold War escalated one Tuesday afternoon when Liam found a crisp, white envelope taped to his front door. It wasn't just a notice, it was a formal declaration. His stomach clenched as he read it. The letter, written in the most obnoxious legalese a non-lawyer could possibly muster, stated that his property was in violation of a newly minted bylaw, Article 7, Section 4B, the Aesthetic Uniformity and View Preservation Clause, a clause Liam knew for a fact that hadn't existed a month ago. The violation, it specified, was his heritage oak. According to Queen Karen and her compliant, terrified board, the tree was excessively large, produced excessive yard debris, and, most offensively, obstructed the natural light and skyline view for other properties, namely, her own. The demand was stark and unbelievable. He was to have the tree professionally and significantly trimmed back to a manageable and uniform size within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in daily fines, starting at $50 and escalating each week. Liam read the letter 3 times, each time with a growing sense of disbelief that curdled into a cold, hard anger. Trim his tree, his magnificent, protected, historical landmark? This wasn't a request, it was an act of war. And Liam, the quiet man who just wanted to be left alone, knew that he had no choice but to fight back. Liam, being a logical and methodical man, believed that this whole ridiculous situation could be cleared up with simple facts. Karen was new to the neighborhood, new to the state even. She was clearly ignorant. She was a bull in a china shop, breaking things she didn't understand. He decided his first move would be one of education, not aggression. He would arm her with the truth, and surely, her reason would prevail. He spent an evening gathering his arsenal of documents. He found the original arborist's report, a thick and detailed document that sang the praises of the oak's health and historical significance. He pulled out the official embossed certificate from the city's historical society, the one that formally designated it a heritage tree, and, most importantly, he went to the city's website and printed out the full text of Municipal Ordinance 217.4, Protection of Designated Landmark Flora. It was all there in black and white, a clear, legally binding set of rules that superseded any piddly HOA bylaw. He highlighted the relevant passages, the ones that specified the hefty fines and potential criminal charges for anyone who damaged a protected tree. Armed with this mountain of evidence, he composed a polite, professional, and devastatingly factual email. He addressed it to Karen and copied the other 2, largely silent, members of the HOA board. He began by acknowledging receipt of her letter. He then calmly and clearly laid out the facts. "Dear Karen and the HOA board," he wrote, "regarding the notice about my oak tree, I wanted to provide some important context that I believe resolves this issue. Attached, you will find documentation confirming that the tree is a city-designated heritage tree, protected under Municipal Ordinance 217.4. He went on to explain what this meant, that any trimming beyond basic health maintenance required a city-approved arborist and a lengthy permit process. He finished with, "I trust this information clarifies the tree's special, legally protected status, and I look forward to the HOA rescinding the violation notice." He hit send, feeling a sense of righteous confidence. There, that should do it. No one, not even Karen, could argue with a city ordinance. Oh, the sweet, naive optimism. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of his enemy. Karen wasn't driven by ignorance. She was fueled by ego, and he had just challenged her authority. Her reply came less than an hour later. It was short, dismissive, and sent with a reply all, a clear power move. "Mr. Liam," it began, with a newly formal tone, "thank you for your context. However, the HOA's bylaws are established to protect the property values of all residents. These community rules supersede any quaint local suggestions. Please ensure compliance by the deadline to avoid penalties. Supersede city law, quaint local suggestions. The words flashed on Liam's screen like a declaration of war. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a direct, arrogant challenge. She knew the law now, and she had chosen to spit on it. The battle lines were drawn. The sheer, unmitigated gall of her response left Liam momentarily speechless. The idea that an HOA, a glorified neighborhood club, could simply decide to supersede municipal law was so profoundly stupid it was almost impressive. It was like a child declaring that their bedroom was a sovereign nation where bedtime was illegal. Liam realized that arguing with her directly would be like trying to teach calculus to a brick wall, a very arrogant, very stubborn brick wall. He knew he needed a bigger weapon. He needed someone who spoke the language of consequences, the one language a bully like Karen might actually understand. It was time to call in the professionals. He didn't just search for a property lawyer. He did his research. He needed a specialist. And after a few hours of digging, he found him. The man's name was Arthur Gable, a partner at a downtown firm. Mr. Gable wasn't just a property lawyer. His online bio proudly stated that he had a special interest and extensive expertise in arbor law and timber trespass. He was, in short, a tree lawyer, and his client testimonials read like a series of horror stories for anyone who had ever wronged a piece of significant foliage. Liam booked a consultation for the next day. He walked into Mr. Gable's office, a grand, wood-paneled room lined with impressive-looking law books, and laid out the whole story. He presented the documents, the violation notice, and the email chain. Mr. Gable, a sharp, older man with eyes that twinkled with a predatory intelligence, read everything in silence. As he finished Karen's final dismissive email, a slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. "Oh," she put it in writing, he said, his voice a low, gleeful rumble. "She actually put her intent to break state and municipal law in an email and sent it to you. This is wonderful." Mr. Gable then gave Liam a gleeful, terrifying education in the finer points of tree law in their state. He explained that for a designated heritage tree, the penalties weren't just about the timber's value. The law allowed for treble damages 3 times the appraised value of the tree, plus replacement costs, legal fees, and even potential punitive damages for willful destruction. "Liam," the lawyer said, leaning forward, "based on the size and designation of your oak, we aren't talking about a few $1,000s here. If she so much as harms a major limb on that tree, she is looking at a lawsuit that could easily climb into the high 6 figures. $500,000 is not an exaggeration." Liam felt a shiver run down his spine, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He had come in for a shield. Mr. Gable had just handed him a nuke. Together, they drafted a formal, certified letter. It was a masterpiece of polite, legal intimidation. It was sent not just to Karen's home address but to the HOA's official mailing address, ensuring the entire board was legally notified. The letter calmly cited every relevant city and state statute. It explicitly detailed the tree's protected status. And it concluded by stating, in no uncertain terms, that any party, be it the HOA, its board members individually, or any contractor they hired involved in the trimming, damaging, or removal of the specified heritage oak, would be held personally and jointly liable for all damages, with a preliminary estimated liability in excess of $500,000. The letter ended with a simple, chilling phrase: "Govern yourselves accordingly." The shot had been fired. The legal gauntlet had been thrown down. No sane person could possibly ignore a warning this clear, this direct, and this financially terrifying. But Liam was quickly learning that sanity was not Karen's strong suit. What do you think a normal person does when they receive a certified letter from a high-powered law firm threatening them with a $500,000 lawsuit? They probably feel a cold dread seep into their bones. They probably call their own lawyer immediately. They almost certainly put a full, screeching halt to whatever course of action led to this terrifying piece of mail. Karen, however, was not a normal person. Faced with a clear, legal, and financially catastrophic warning, she did what only a true top-tier Karen would do. She got angry, and she got personal. A few days after the certified letter was signed for and delivered, Liam discovered that she had chosen to escalate her war from the legal realm to the court of public opinion. A new email landed in the inbox of every single resident of the Maple Lane Homeowners Association. It was from Karen, writing in her official capacity as HOA president. The subject line was a masterwork of passive aggression, a note on community spirit and neighborly cooperation. Liam's blood ran cold as he read it. She never mentioned him by name, of course. She was just smart enough for that. But the target was unmistakable. She wrote about certain residents who put their own selfish interests above the aesthetic harmony and property values of the entire community. She lamented that some individuals were unwilling to make small sacrifices for the greater good. Then came the veiled reference to the lawyer's letter. She wrote about how some people resort to aggressive, threatening tactics to avoid their neighborly duties and bully the board into inaction. She was painting him as a rich, selfish bully who was threatening the nice little old lady on the HOA board with lawyers because he didn't want to trim his overgrown shrubbery. She was trying to poison the well, to turn the entire neighborhood against him. She ended the email with a flourish of sanctimonious drivel. Rest assured, your board will not be intimidated by such behavior. We remain committed to enforcing the community's standards for the benefit of everyone. And the final, breathtakingly arrogant move, the cherry on top of this sundae of stupidity, she forwarded the email directly to Liam, with a one-line addition. For your reference, the 30-day deadline is still in effect. She was publicly shaming him while privately taunting him. She had taken Mr. Gable's nuclear warning shot and treated it like a spitball. Liam immediately forwarded the entire thing to his lawyer. Mr. Gable's response was almost instantaneous. This is a gift. She is building our case for punitive damages. Do not reply. Do not engage. Just save everything. Let her keep digging. And so, Liam waited. The deadline was ticking closer, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He had done everything right, followed every logical step. But he was dealing with a person who operated on pure, illogical ego, and he had a terrible feeling she was about to do something incredibly, irrevocably stupid. The 30-day deadline arrived on a Friday. The day passed in an unnerving silence. No new notices appeared on his door. No angry emails materialized in his inbox. Saturday came and went with the same quiet stillness. A small, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in Liam's mind. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally been talked off the ledge. Maybe one of the other board members, or perhaps the HOA's management company, had seen the lawyer's letter and the potential for financial ruin and finally managed to get through to her. Maybe her own ego had finally met an obstacle it couldn't overcome, the specter of total bankruptcy. That weekend, Liam had a long-standing commitment he couldn't easily break. His sister, who lived about 3 hours away, was celebrating a milestone birthday, and the whole family was gathering for a surprise party. He was hesitant to leave, the situation with Karen leaving him on edge. But with the deadline passed and a full weekend of silence, he allowed himself to believe the crisis had been averted. He packed a small overnight bag on Saturday morning, took one last long look at his beautiful oak tree, standing proud and untouched against the brilliant blue sky, and set off for the party. He had a wonderful time. For 24 precious hours, he managed to put the HOA drama out of his mind completely. He silenced his phone, laughed with his family, shared old stories, and celebrated his sister. It was a much-needed escape, a brief return to sanity. He started the drive home late Sunday afternoon, feeling relaxed and refreshed, the stress of the past month finally seeming to lift. He turned onto his street, just as dusk was settling. The streetlights flickered on, casting a familiar, warm glow. Everything looked normal, peaceful. He pulled into his driveway, hit the button for the garage door, and watched it rumble open. He grabbed his bag from the passenger seat, stepped out of the garage, and glanced towards his backyard, anticipating the familiar, comforting silhouette of his tree against the twilight sky. And then his world stopped. His heart hammered against his ribs. Something was profoundly, horribly wrong. The shape was wrong. The massive, graceful sweep of the canopy was gone. In its place was a jagged, mutilated skeleton. He dropped his bag on the concrete. A cold, sickening dread washed over him as he began to walk, then run, towards the back of the house. The sight that greeted him in his backyard was one of utter devastation. It was a massacre. They hadn't just trimmed it. They had butchered it. Huge, foundational limbs, some thicker than his own body, had been crudely hacked off and lay strewn across his lawn, like the corpses of fallen giants. The perfect, centuries-old balance of the tree was gone, replaced by ugly, weeping stumps. The tree, his majestic, historic, living landmark, was a grotesque ruin. It had been murdered. And there, on his back porch table, held down by a rock, was another crisp white envelope. He opened it with trembling hands. It was an invoice, from the HOA, for $500. The line item read, "Emergency tree trimming services, violation correction." Karen hadn't backed down. She had waited until he was gone, and then she had twisted the knife. The first emotion that washed over Liam wasn't anger. It was a deep, profound, gut-wrenching grief. He walked among the fallen limbs, touching the rough bark, his hand coming away sticky with sap that looked like blood in the dimming light. This tree had been a living creature, a silent witness to 2 centuries of history, and it had been destroyed for nothing, for spite, for the petty satisfaction of a miserable woman drunk on the dregs of power. But as the shock wore off, the grief began to cool and harden into something else, a white-hot, diamond-hard rage. It was a cold, quiet fury, the kind that doesn't scream but meticulously plans. He didn't stomp or yell. He calmly walked back into his house, took a deep breath to steady his hands, and picked up his phone. He made 3 calls. The first was to the non-emergency line of the local police department. He reported a case of felony destruction of property. He was careful with his words, explaining that the property destroyed was a city-protected landmark with an appraised value well into 6 figures. That got their attention. Within 30 minutes, an officer was at his house. The cop, a weary-looking veteran, walked into the backyard, took one look at the carnage, and let out a low whistle. After Liam showed him the stack of paperwork, the heritage certificate, the ordinance, the lawyer's letter, the officer's demeanor shifted from a routine vandalism call to something far more serious. He took detailed photos, wrote a thorough report, and listed Karen's name as the primary person of interest, based on the clear evidence of prior harassment. The second call was to his lawyer, Arthur Gable. It was Sunday evening, so he left a voicemail. His voice was unnaturally calm, devoid of emotion. "Mr. Gable, it's Liam. She did it. She cut the tree. She waited until I was out of town and she butchered it. Call me as soon as you get this. It's time." The third and final call was to the top certified arborist in the state, a man whose name had been given to him by the Historical Society. He explained the situation, and the arborist, horrified, agreed to come out first thing Monday morning for an emergency assessment. Liam spent the rest of the night under the harsh glare of his porch light, documenting everything. He took hundreds of photos from every conceivable angle. He carefully placed the invoice Karen had left into a plastic evidence bag. He didn't sleep a wink. He just sat by his window, staring at the ghost of his tree, and let the resolve settle into his bones. This was no longer about saving a tree. The tree was already lost. This was about retribution. This was about burning Karen's little kingdom to the ground. Monday morning dawned grey and somber, a perfect reflection of Liam's mood. The arborist, a solemn, wiry man named Mr. Henderson, arrived precisely at 8. He had the quiet, respectful demeanor of an undertaker, which seemed horribly appropriate. He walked the perimeter of the backyard slowly, his face a mask of professional concern that deepened into visible disgust as he examined the cuts. He ran his hand over the splintered wood, peered at the weeping wounds on the trunk, and shook his head with a quiet sigh. After a long, silent hour of inspection, he finally turned to Liam. "This wasn't professional work," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "This was a hack job. They used the wrong equipment. The cuts are ragged, and they've stripped the canopy so severely it can't recover. It's a practice called topping, and for a mature oak like this, it's a death sentence." He pointed to the deep gouges in the remaining trunk. "They've introduced disease and shock to the system. I am so sorry to tell you this, but the tree is functionally dead. It will continue to decay, becoming a serious safety hazard. It will have to be completely removed." The words, though expected, hit Liam like a physical blow. The tree was dead. It was official. Mr. Henderson then moved on to the grim business of the appraisal. This was the part Liam was waiting for. The arborist explained the complex formula used for valuing landmark trees: species, size, age, condition prior to the damage, contribution to the property's value, and the special historical designation. He took measurements, consulted his charts, and crunched numbers on a ruggedized tablet. Finally, he looked up at Liam. his expression grim. "Based on the standard valuation methods for a protected specimen of this caliber," he said, "the appraised value of this tree, before the incident, was $160,000. $160,000. The number hung in the air. But Liam was already doing the math in his head, the math his lawyer had taught him. He remembered the beautiful, terrible phrase from state law, treble damages. He took that staggering number and multiplied it by 3, $480,000. That was the starting point. That was the price of Karen's arrogance. Suddenly, the invoice for $500 that she had left on his porch seemed like the most pathetic, laughable miscalculation in the history of human conflict. She hadn't just made a mistake, she had signed her own financial death warrant. When Liam called Mr. Repellent, Gable with the official assessment, he could hear the lawyer's sharp intake of breath over the phone, followed by a sound that was suspiciously like a gleeful chuckle. 160,000, Gable repeated, savoring the number. "Oh, this is better than I'd hoped." She has no idea what's about to hit her. The legal machinery, which had been idling, roared to life. Mr. Gable's office moved with the terrifying efficiency of a predator closing in on its prey. The lawsuit they filed was not just a legal document, it was a work of art, a symphony of destruction. It named the Maple Lane Homeowners Association as the primary defendant, but Mr. Gable, in a move of strategic genius, also named Karen personally as a co-defendant. This was the kill shot. It meant that even if the HOA declared bankruptcy, Karen's personal assets were on the line. Her house, her car, her savings, it was all fair game. She could not hide behind the corporate shield of the HOA. She was personally on the hook for her actions. The lawsuit demanded the full Monty. It started with the treble 80, 480 in treble damages for the value of the tree. To that, it added the $15,000 quote Liam had received for the complex and dangerous job of removing the massive, dead oak. It added the several $1,000 fee for the arborist's official assessment and report. And, of course, it demanded that the defendants cover all of Liam's legal fees, which were already climbing into the tens of thousands. The grand total of the lawsuit was a breathtaking $540,000. The day the process server arrived at the quiet suburban homes of the 3 HOA board members was a day that would live in Maple Lane infamy. The other 2 board members, a retired accountant and a meek stay-at-home mom, who had just gone along with whatever Karen said, were served first. They reportedly stared at the legal documents with pale, horrified faces. But the best part, as told to Liam later by a sympathetic neighbor, was the serving of Karen herself. The server arrived at her door just as she was watering her meticulously manicured, non-native, HOA-approved rose bushes. She apparently tried to refuse the papers, declaring, "I don't accept this," as if that were a magical incantation. The server simply dropped the thick packet at her feet on the welcome mat and said, "You've been served," before walking away. The Queen was no longer in her castle. She was in a legal siege, and the walls were about to come tumbling down. The lawsuit landed in the HOA's lap like a live grenade. The 2 other board members, who had treated their positions as a casual hobby, were suddenly thrust into a legal crisis that threatened to ruin them financially. They immediately called for an emergency board meeting, demanding that Karen explain how she had allowed this to happen. The meeting, held in the accountant's living room, was reportedly less of a meeting and more of a firing squad. Under a barrage of panicked, furious questions, Karen's smug composure finally shattered. She tried to bluster, to insist that the HOA had every right to enforce its bylaws. But then the accountant, a man who understood numbers, asked the fatal question, "Did you receive any legal warnings prior to cutting down the tree?" Karen, cornered and desperate, was forced to admit that, yes, a letter from a lawyer had arrived. The revelation that she had received a certified legal letter explicitly warning of a $500,000 liability and had hidden it from them caused an explosion. The meek stay-at-home mom reportedly burst into tears, while the accountant turned a shade of purple that was truly alarming. They realized in that moment that Karen hadn't just been enforcing rules. She had been pursuing a personal vendetta, and she had dragged them all down with her. But it got worse. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, Mr. Gable's office subpoenaed all of the HOA's communications and financial records. The paper trail Karen had created was a prosecutor's dream. They found the receipts and communications with the tree service she had hired. It was, just as Liam had suspected, a completely unlicensed, uninsured, cash-only operation she'd found on Craigslist. She had deliberately hired an off-the-books crew precisely because any legitimate company would have refused the job. It was premeditated, willful, and documented in her own emails. The final nail in the coffin came from the HOA's insurance company. The board frantically filed a claim, hoping their liability insurance would cover the lawsuit. The insurance agent took one look at the file, the ignored legal warning, the hiring of an unlicensed contractor to perform an illegal act, and sent back a swift, brutal denial of the claim. The policy, like most, had a crystal-clear exclusion for intentional criminal acts committed by the board. By knowingly breaking the law, Karen had single-handedly voided the very insurance policy that was meant to protect them from this kind of disaster. The HOA was on its own. The entire $540,000 liability was theirs, and theirs alone. The news that the insurance claim was denied spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Suddenly, this wasn't just Liam's problem versus Karen. It was Karen's problem versus every single homeowner on Maple Lane. The $500,000 bill was going to come from the HOA's funds, and everyone knew that the association's modest reserve fund wouldn't even make a dent in it. An emergency all-hands neighborhood meeting was called in the community clubhouse. It was standing room only, and the atmosphere was thick with anger and fear. Karen, looking small and pale, was forced to stand at the front of the room as the new acting board president, the accountant, who now looked 10 years older, laid out the grim reality of the situation. He explained the lawsuit, the voided insurance, and the fact that the HOA was completely, utterly, and indefensibly liable. When he announced the total sum they were being sued for, a collective gasp went through the room. People were shouting. The family who had been fined for the snowman was particularly vocal. The very neighbors Karen had tried to rally to her cause were now her most vicious accusers. They saw her not as a leader, but as the reckless captain who had steered their ship directly into an iceberg. In a unanimous, thunderous vote, she was officially removed from the board and stripped of all her HOA privileges. It was a public shaming of the highest order. The HOA's newly hired lawyer gave them blunt advice: settle immediately. There was zero chance of winning in court. The evidence was so overwhelmingly in Liam's favor that going to trial would only result in the same outcome, but with even higher legal fees tacked on. Mr. Gable, now holding all the cards, was in no mood to be merciful. He rejected their first two lowball offers with contempt. He made it clear that he was prepared to go to trial and win a judgment if they didn't offer a settlement that made his client whole. Finally, facing total ruin, the HOA capitulated. The final settlement was for $525,000, a sum so large it was almost abstract. To pay it, the HOA had to completely drain its reserve fund. But that was just the beginning. To cover the remaining $400,000+, they were forced to issue a massive special assessment. Every single household in the neighborhood was legally required to pay a one-time fee of just over $4,000, all because of Karen. You can imagine how that went over. She wasn't just an annoyance anymore. She was the $4,000 mistake living 2 doors down. But what about Karen herself? Liam had been adamant with Mr. Gable about one thing. He wanted her to be held personally accountable. He didn't want her to be able to just hide behind the collective financial pain of the neighborhood. And Mr. Gable had delivered. The settlement agreement, which he masterfully negotiated, contained a specific clause stipulating that a significant portion of the total had to be paid directly by Karen from her personal assets. She was held personally liable for $150,000. The blood drained from her face when her own lawyer explained the non-negotiable term. There was no way she had that kind of money in savings. The only major asset she had to her name was her house. The very house she had bought with dreams of ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist was now the only thing she could use to pay for her folly. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Within a week of the settlement, a for sale sign was hammered into her perfectly manicured lawn. It was a desperate, must-sell situation. She had no choice but to accept the first reasonable offer that came in, just to liquidate the asset and satisfy the judgment against her. The schadenfreude in the neighborhood was palpable. Neighbors would slow their cars as they drove by, pointing at the sign with grim satisfaction. They were all out $4,000, but at least the witch was being driven out of town. Liam watched the proceedings from a distance. He felt a quiet, somber sense of victory. The money was never the main point, but it was the only language Karen understood. It was the only way to make her feel a fraction of the loss he had felt. The last he saw of her was on moving day. She was loading boxes into a small rental truck by herself. No neighbors came out to say goodbye. No one offered to help. She was a pariah, a ghost haunting the street she had tried to conquer. As she drove away for the last time, she didn't even glance in the direction of Liam's house. It was a final, pathetic admission of her total and utter defeat. The aftermath for Liam was bittersweet. The massive settlement check arrived, a surreal piece of paper that represented so much pain and triumph. No amount of money could ever bring back the magnificent living thing that had been lost. His backyard felt empty, exposed. The sky too big and bright, without the familiar canopy. But the sense of justice, the knowledge that Karen had faced real, devastating consequences for her actions, was a profound comfort. He decided to use the money in a way that would honor the tree's memory. He hired the best landscape architecture firm in the region to redesign his entire backyard. A grove of beautiful, healthy young oak trees was planted, an investment in a future canopy for generations he would never meet. He used a significant portion of the settlement to ensure the safe and respectful removal of the dead giant, but he didn't let them haul all the wood away. He had the arborist, Mr. Henderson, identify the best, most solid sections of the massive trunk. He then commissioned a master woodworker, an artisan who specialized in large-scale carvings. Over several months, the craftsman transformed the heart of the great oak into a stunning, hand-carved bench. It was a massive, solid piece of furniture, polished to a deep shine, with the gnarled grain of the 200-year-old wood telling its own story. Liam placed the bench in the very spot where the tree's trunk had once stood. It was a memorial, a throne, and a symbol of his victory. He could sit there in the evenings, feel the solid wood beneath him, and remember. The rest of the money went into investments, securing his financial future in a way he had never imagined possible. In her mad quest to slightly inconvenience him, Karen had inadvertently made him a wealthy man. As for the neighborhood, a new era of peace began. The new HOA board was made up of reasonable people who immediately rescinded all of Karen's ridiculous petty rules. The beige mailbox bylaw was the first to go, a symbolic gesture that was met with quiet cheers. The $4,000 special assessment was a bitter pill for everyone, but it served as a permanent, expensive reminder. Never, ever let a Karen take charge. Liam finally had his peace and quiet back, and every time he sat on the bench carved from the heart of his old friend, he felt a sense of profound, satisfying justice. The Queen was dead. Long live the tree. What a truly epic saga. It's got everything. A quiet hero, a villain of unbelievable arrogance, a wise old mentor in the form of a tree lawyer, and a final battle that ends in total financial annihilation. It's the kind of story that just makes you want to pump your fist in the air. The sheer scale of Karen's self-destruction is a thing to behold. She had so many chances to stop. She could have stopped when Liam politely explained the situation. She could have stopped when a literal lawyer sent her a certified letter screaming, "Stop!" She could have stopped at any point and just let it go. But her ego wouldn't allow it. In her mind, her authority as the HOA president was absolute, more powerful than city laws, more powerful than legal precedent, more powerful than common sense itself. She saw a challenge to her power, and she felt she had to win, no matter the cost. Well, she found out the cost, and the cost was everything. Her house, her money, her reputation. She gambled it all on being right about a tree, and she lost spectacularly. It's a perfect illustration of the old saying, a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. Liam presented her with facts, with laws, with warnings. None of it mattered. Her reality was shaped by her own sense of entitlement, and she was willing to bulldoze anything that contradicted it, including, as it turned out, her own life. It's a tragedy of her own making, and that's the most satisfying kind of justice there is. You can't even feel sorry for her, because every step of her downfall was a choice she made herself. And let's take a moment to appreciate the beautiful, brutal weapon that is tree law. It's such a specific and wonderful corner of the legal system. Most people probably don't even know it exists, but it's there for a reason, to protect valuable, often irreplaceable natural assets from precisely this kind of arrogant destruction. The concept of treble damages is just brilliant. It's not just about reimbursement, it's about punishment. It's a financial penalty so severe that it's meant to serve as a powerful deterrent. It says, "Don't even think about touching this tree, because the consequences will be so far beyond what you can imagine. It is simply not worth it." It's the law's way of putting up a giant, electrified, razor wire-topped fence around our most precious natural landmarks. Karen, in her ignorance and hubris, thought she was just dealing with a simple landscaping issue. She had no idea she was poking a legal dragon. She stumbled into a highly specialized field of law where the penalties are draconian, and the plaintiffs are often, like Liam, deeply and emotionally invested. She brought a clipboard to a cannon fight. Mr. Gable, the tree law expert, knew exactly what kind of firepower he had at his disposal, and he used it to its full, devastating effect. It's a reminder that while the wheels of justice can grind slowly, sometimes they grind exceedingly, wonderfully fine. It's just so perfect that the quiet, unassuming man who loved a tree was able to bring down a neighborhood tyrant using the power of the tree itself. You also have to think about the other people in the story, the collateral damage and the silent observers. What about the other two board members, the accountant and the stay-at-home mom? They were complicit, whether through apathy or fear. They let Karen run wild, probably because it was easier than confronting her. They signed off on her ridiculous rules. They likely approved the violation notice sent to Liam, and for their passivity, they were rewarded with a massive lawsuit and a share of the public shame. It's a lesson in itself. Standing by and letting a bully operate is a choice, and it can have consequences. They learned the hard way that "I was just going along with it" is not a defense, legally or morally. I'm sure for the rest of their lives, anytime someone suggests something that seems a little off in a meeting, they will be the first to raise their hand and say, "Hang on a second, let's think about this." Karen's reign of terror was a very expensive education for them in the importance of a spine. And then there are the other neighbors, the ones who had to pay that $4,000 Karen tax. Their anger is completely justified. Their money, their vacation funds, their emergency savings were all vaporized to pay for one woman's personal vendetta. The story serves as a stark warning about community governance. The people you elect to your HOA board or your city council or any position of power matter. Letting the most aggressive, power-hungry person take charge because no one else wants the job is a recipe for disaster. Apathy has a price tag, and in the case of Maple Lane, it was a very specific and very painful $4,000 per household. The symbolism in the story is just so rich. The tree itself represents everything Karen is not: old, patient, deeply rooted, and a provider of shelter and beauty. It stands for history, for nature, for things that are beyond the control of petty human desires. It is a symbol of permanence. Karen, on the other hand, represents the opposite: the transient, the artificial, the desperate need to control and impose a sterile, uniform order on the world. Her beige mailboxes and her rigid rules are a manifestation of her own empty soul. Her attack on the tree was, on a symbolic level, an attack on history and nature itself. She wanted to tame it, to cut it down to a manageable size, just as she wanted to do to the spirit of the neighborhood. And in the end, the tree wins. Even in death, it triumphs. Its monetary value becomes the weapon that destroys her. Its wood is transformed into a beautiful memorial, a permanent fixture in the yard, long after Karen herself is gone and forgotten. The bench, carved from the heart of the oak, is a final, poetic symbol. It represents resilience, the idea that even from a great loss, something beautiful and enduring can be created. Karen tried to erase the tree's legacy, and instead, she cemented it forever, while completely erasing her own. It's a perfect, almost mythological ending. The slow, quiet power of nature and history winning out over the loud, frantic, and ultimately self-defeating rage of a single, entitled person. Let's talk about Liam's character for a moment. He's the perfect protagonist for this kind of story, because he's so relatable. He's not an aggressive alpha male looking for a fight. He's a quiet, reasonable person who was pushed too far. He tried every peaceful, logical method first. He tried to educate. He tried to reason. He tried to de-escalate. It was only when every single one of those avenues was arrogantly shut down by Karen that he was forced to unleash the lawyers. This is crucial, because it makes his final, devastating victory feel completely earned and justified. He's not a vengeful person by nature. He was molded into one by circumstance. We cheer for him so hard because we see ourselves in him. We've all been in situations where we've tried to be reasonable with an unreasonable person, and we've all fantasized about what it would be like to have a Mr. Gable on speed dial. Liam represents the quiet majority, the people who just want to live their lives in peace. Karen represents the loud, disruptive minority who think the world should revolve around them. And Liam's victory is a victory for all of us. It's a validation of the idea that being decent and reasonable doesn't mean you have to be a doormat. It shows that when pushed to the brink, even the quietest person can fight back with the force of a hurricane, especially when they have the law, justice, and the spirit of a 200-year-old tree on their side. I wonder what the conversation was like between Karen and the buyers of her house. Can you imagine the disclosures? So, any history of disputes with the neighbors or the HOA? Well, funny, you should ask. How do you even begin to explain that you're selling the house to pay for a $500,000 judgment you incurred because you illegally destroyed a neighbor's tree in a fit of pique? The sheer humiliation of it all. The new owners probably got the house for a great price, but they also inherited a neighborhood that would be watching them like hawks. They probably had to be the most perfect, rule-abiding neighbors in the history of the world, just to avoid the residual stink of Karen's legacy. And what about the unlicensed tree-cutting crew from Craigslist? They are the shadowy, background figures in this drama. They took $500 cash to commit a crime worth hundreds of thousands. Did they know the tree was protected? Probably not. Did they care? Definitely not. They are the instruments of Karen's stupidity, the cheap weapon she chose that ended up backfiring so spectacularly. It's a perfect detail, because it shows her mindset. She wasn't just arrogant, she was cheap. She tried to wage a war on a shoestring budget, and it blew up in her face. If she had tried to hire a proper, insured company, they would have refused the job, and the whole crisis would have been averted. Her attempt to cut corners was, in fact, the corner she cut that led her directly off a cliff. Every choice she made was the wrong one, at every single stage of the conflict. It's almost an art form. How perfectly she managed to orchestrate her own demise. The story is also a powerful commentary on the nature of value. To Karen, the tree had negative value. It was an obstruction, a nuisance, a source of mess. Its worth was measured only in the inconvenience it caused her. She saw it as a thing to be managed or removed. To Liam, the tree had an immense, almost spiritual value. It was a source of beauty, shade, and history. It was the soul of his property, a connection to the past. Its worth couldn't be captured by a dollar sign, but the legal system, in its own way, had to find a way to quantify that value. And it did so with a staggering number, $160,000. That number, multiplied by 3, became the language that finally got through to Karen. She couldn't understand the tree's historical or aesthetic value, but she sure as hell understood the value of her own house being sold out from under her. It's a sad but true reflection of the world. Sometimes, the only way to make certain people respect the things you cherish is to translate that cherish into a language of financial pain. Liam would have given anything to have his tree back, but since that was impossible, taking away Karen's most valuable asset was the closest thing to justice he could get. He forced her to recognize the tree's value by making her pay for it with her own. A perfect, if brutal, transaction. And so, the quiet little street on Maple Lane returned to its peaceful state, forever changed by the War of the Oak. The story of Karen and the tree would become a local legend, a cautionary tale told to new residents for generations, a story about what happens when entitlement goes unchecked and a quiet man is pushed too far. It's a reminder that the biggest, most beautiful things in our world are often the most vulnerable to the smallest, pettiest of people. But it's also a story of hope. It's a story that proves that with the right tools, a good lawyer, a strong case, and an unwavering belief in what is right, it is possible to fight back and win. Justice can be slow, it can be expensive, but when it finally arrives, it can be as mighty and as satisfying as a 200-year-old oak tree standing tall against the sky.